Okay, hey, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. They have a special segment brought to you guys by the team over at Belmont Watches. I've, of course, have purchased watches from them, and they lend in watches all the time. They didn't lend in either of these, but I actually did purchase that Seiko 5 GMT from them. I've also had stuff serviced through them. I've sold through them. I've bought new. I've bought used. And I've even acquired some grails thanks to them. So I'm definitely happy to support local business, and they are here local in the San Diego area. Now, but today's kind of overall theme is going to be discussing those mainstream darlings when it comes to collection cornerstones as people's first quote unquote real or good watch. We see this asked all the time. Hey, I'm looking to finally buy a serious watch. I've had Casios, I've had Timex. I want to buy my first mechanical, or just maybe my first legit quote unquote watch. What do you all recommend? And these are two of probably the most recommended watches when it comes to that, in terms of somebody saying, hey, I want a real watch, and I don't want to spend a ton, obviously under $1,000. These are both closer to 500, one being slightly under 500, one being slightly over 500. So I thought, why not share this? Because there are so many viewers that are at different parts of their collecting journey where they may be looking for kind of their first real watch. And I think these are two great candidates, and I will definitely talk to you guys about why. But before that, let's go ahead and get a quick message from our sponsors. They say you don't just buy the product, you buy the seller too. Well, here's a seller I can absolutely recommend. Belmont Watches in San Diego. They deal in both new and pre-owned, from industry mainstays to niche independents, across vintage and modern references. I've personally purchased watches from them, and even had watches serviced and repaired through their local network. Whether you're just browsing current inventory or searching for a special reference, reach out and connect. You never know, they might be able to source the exact model you've been looking for. They drop new models every Thursday and even offer free 2-day shipping on all orders. Check out this amazing one-owner find, a true piece of history equipped with genuine one-off memorabilia personal to the Royal Canadian Air Force pilot who wore it proudly for so many years. You just can't find packages like this via standard retail. It takes real-world industry experience to create an offering like this. And if you're ever local, visiting downtown San Diego, you can check out their selection in person, or just stop by and talk shop with some fellow enthusiasts who also happen to be some of the most down-to-earth and knowledgeable guys in the industry. So before your next big purchase, make sure to check out Belmont Watches and tell them Mark sent you. Thanks, guys. Okay, guys, and we're back. All right, so as you've noticed, I don't have my Seiko 5 on its original bracelet. Not that I didn't like the bracelet. It was actually so good that I took it off and put it on a Seiko mod, and I swapped out the clasp for a Marine Master 300 clasp. Worked out beautifully for that OEM plus look, and it actually enabled me to kind of do something a little bit different with this GMT, because I do have, of course, my my kind of grail GMT, which is a Grand Seiko, which is also a blue dial on bracelet, the SBGM 245. Love that watch. And I did want to differentiate this Seiko 5 from it, just so I would kind of have more of an excuse to wear it. So I have been experimenting with some different straps. This is actually a really old Hirsch Robbie strap that I've had for years and years. I don't even know if they still make this one. I would imagine they probably still do, but you never know. Sometimes they swap up colorways and everything. And then of course I do have the Tissot, although they do make a couple of bracelet, strap options for it. I have it on the OEM bracelet, and this is one that my wife purchased for me for, I believe it was for a birthday years ago. It might have been a Father's Day gift, might have been a birthday gift. That stuff, there aren't so many times they celebrate dear old dad around the house, so it was either my birthday or Father's Day. I don't think it was a Christmas gift. And man, this thing's great. So both of these watches often get recommended because they're from two solid brands. Seiko, especially within the Seiko 5 line, in terms of offering so much value for in-house, and obviously that horological significance in terms of all of the achievements they've made over the years. Tissot, being one of the founding members of the Swatch Group, and then of course this beautiful timepiece really striking the iron while it's hot in terms of integrated steel sports watches and that Genta design. This actually does, it's more of a recreation of a 1970s model, which took a lot of inspiration, I would say, from the Rolex Oyster Quartz at the time. So it's not completely original, but the nice thing is that it is a reissue of a model that they did make. They didn't just make this up and say, hey, we're inspired by the 70s. They were inspired by something that they actually participated in terms of helping grow that design aesthetic. And of course, the dial definitely is an update and more of a nod to something like an AP Royal Oak. But apart from that, it definitely has its own personality. Both of these are mechanical watches, with the Seiko, of course, being a GMT watch, so it's going to have that extra GMT feature, so you can but it's going to be more of a collar style, and then you do have this bi-directional rotating friction fit bezel, so that if you wanted to calculate other time zones or track something beyond just 2, you actually very easily could. I would say typically I like to think slide bezels as for calculation versus for tracking, because the last thing you want to do is leave your bezel with an offset, and it just kind of makes things more confusing. I'd like to think that intuitively you're going to, of course, always look at the hands first, then secondary you're going to look at the extra hand right there in red, that GMT hand, and then tertiary you're going to be looking at the bezel to try to figure out. So very, very nice. They actually both do have display case backs, and they both have what you could consider in-house movements. Of course, these are made by ETA in terms of the Powermatic, but ETA is owned by the Swatch Group, and so is Tissot, so it's kind of in group, as they say, whereas a little bit more of kind of a direct through line in terms of the movement and Seiko and kind of it all being all under the same umbrella, although the corporation of Seiko is much larger, Seiko Epson Core, than you would think, and it even expands well beyond outside of watches as well. So there's a lot of different ways you can look at it, but it's one of those things. Japanese in-house seems to go a little bit less appreciated, probably because it's not really that special. Most Japanese watches are going to be in-house, whereas it's different, where most Swiss watches typically are going, at least modern Swiss watches, are going to have off-the-shelf movements from ETA, Sellita, or one of the other brands that are out there that provide those third-party options. Now, why these are so popular? Well, they offer a ton of value. They have the brand recognition, and even in terms of the model, you have this timeless design, of course inspired by the Seiko SKX, which ran for like 20 something years, and before that it even ran with a different nomenclature. So this kind of style has been around forever, and it's something that the current round of collectors all can identify with. Similar story here, except it's a little bit more contemporary in terms of, hey, people are really loving these integrated steel sports watches again, and it's from a trusted brand in Tissot, and it's at a really affordable price. $650 MSRP, $475 MSRP, not too far off. Again, just under 500, just above 500. One of the nice things about getting this Tissot, let's say if you buy it at full MSRP, typically, at least for me, what I noticed, because my wife ordered this directly from Tissot before it started being held by a lot of retailers, so I was like one of the first people to get it, which was cool. But also they even included the first servicing free, so I thought that was really nice. In terms of servicing, this is going to be definitely a movement that you can't really get serviced at a standard, or at least not, you can't have it regulated. I guess you could still have it serviced by a standard watchmaker, but one of the changes with this Powermatic 80 movement is that you can see there you go. Normally where you would see some fine adjustment there, there's nothing, so you can't really do that without the right tools, and that's something that you would have to go through the Swatch Group for, although ultimately these are running a lot more accurate. They extended the power reserve by slowing down the beat rate, so both of these watches are going to be beating at 3 hertz. So they're going to have similar ticks, and some people might find them to be a bit juddery versus a 4 hertz movement, since these are 3 hertz. But the nice thing about the Seiko is this can really, I mean, you can even do this yourself. I have done it myself, made adjustments. There you go. You can see you can still do the manual adjustment there, or a watchmaker can do it for you. But yeah, I mean, it's very minimal for both of these in terms of the decoration on the movements. They're really meant to be workhorse movements. And you can see in terms of even the profiles, they're a little bit similar. Of course, they do things in different ways. The Seiko is going to hide its thickness with these cushion-shaped chamfers and curves and high polished sections, which are going to help it wear much smaller on wrist. Whereas the PRX is going to, of course, have this compartmentalized, very thin mid case, and then having kind of an equal sandwich of the case back and the front bezel there, so it's kind of like it's floating, being held in place by a nice thin case. And then of course this is going to sink into your wrist a bit while you have it on. Both lovely blue dials here, guys. Blue dials are just really versatile, because yeah, people blue jeans are very common. So of course the steel is always going to match with stuff, but the color blue is, it seems to be a pretty universal color. I know green is big right now, black, grays, those are always going to be classic, but there's something about the blue that gives you a nice little pop of color, as us collectors like to say. You're getting 10 bar or 100 meters water resistance. Same here. So they're both going to be, of course, that's push-pull crown, meaning that as long as the crown is in, and you can't guarantee that the crown is in, if you're flailing your arms around in the water. So, the nice thing is if you get these dirty, you can rinse them off. Just ensure that the crown is pushed in. And of course, you want to swim or whatever, it'll be good to go. But again, they will only be water resistant with these pushed in, and then you never know, they could come unpushed and come out and then let water in. So if it doesn't have a screw down crown, I typically am not going to really trust it in water, no matter what the rating is. And I've had watches with 200 meters of water resistance that have a push-pull crown. So yes, I'm going to feel more comfortable rinsing them off, or if I get pushed into something. But in terms of, something that I'm going to do water sports with, I'm going to be active with, then, I'm going to typically prefer a screw down crown, even at a lower, water resistant. If it was 50 meters water resistant with a screw down crown, I would rather swim with that than one that's 200 meters water resistance with a push pull crown. And that's just my brain. That's how it works. But yeah, these are just such great cornerstone pieces. They're ones where no one's really going to question you. You buy the watch, you're excited about the watch. I mean, I've had folks, meet with me, the viewers that were local at watch meets, and tell me, hey, you're the reason why I bought my PRX. And I just love that, because this is just such a wonderful watch. I wear it so much. There's probably a couple times there on Instagram where people might have thought this was my signature watch. I was wearing it so much, but of course I do have to mix things up as I review and whatnot. I probably didn't get enough wear out of this Seiko 5, but who knows, it might end up getting gifted to my brother the next time I see him. But it's a great watch. I just have other GMTs, and I have other Seiko GMTs. I have the blue dial Seiko GMTs, Grand Seiko. So it just is one of those things where, of course, I got it for the channel, for the review aspect, to experience it. But, it's just one that probably doesn't get worn enough. Although I'd say every once in a while I do wear it casually out and about, just because it's a fun watch with a lot of pop, a lot of color, a lot of contrast, which I can really appreciate. And of course, as an SKX lover, it's really nice to see those types of feature sets. So with that said, let's actually get these pieces on the wrist and see how they wear. Okay, as you can see on my 7.5-inch wrist, this thing wears beautifully. And yeah, I don't have a really flat wrist. I actually have a more round wrist. And it still wears really beautifully. Of course, if I get my wrist a little bit too close to the camera there, you're going to get a bit of perspective distortion. It's going to look a little bit bigger on wrist. But if I keep it nice and low and then just tighten up the shot, you're going to see just how well it sits there on the wrist. And you can see, even though it is kind of sandwiched in there, it still wears quite thin and drapes really, really well, which I absolutely can appreciate. And, you know, again, these watches, this isn't a comparison in terms of, hey, which one should you get? If you get either of these, you really can't go wrong. Check that out. It sits really beautifully, just classic sporty look. Of course, it's not going to be a true diver, but it does have a fair amount of water resistance, so this is something that you can wear kind of on your everyday adventure. Let me just get the dust off of that crystal there, and you can really enjoy this piece. Really handsome. I love the pops of color, like the contrast. This is just such a handsome piece, and I really enjoy it. And yeah, I wish I wore it more, but you know, I have a lot of watches and I have a lot of Seikos, so it doesn't get the wear that it should. But these both wear really fantastic on the wrist, and you can see very different, of course, the cushion shape, using the reflections there to kind of trick your eye into believing that it's a bit smaller on wrist. And again, my wrist is probably going to appear smaller than most 7.5-inch wrists because I have a more round wrist. I have more you know, length at this aspect, and not just flat and thin across. So you know, again, there's just so many different things that kind of come into play when it comes to how a watch wears. And then you also got to consider, of course, a person in totality versus just a floating wrist, where you know, on a floating wrist, a lot of times everybody wants to see the watch get smaller and smaller and smaller. These just were released in a 35mm length. I would probably have preferred if they would release them in a 38. 35 is a little bit small, and then also they have a little bit more of a taper, so instead of tapering down to 18mm, they're tapering down to 16. I don't mind a 16mm taper if there's a clasp, if there's a buckle, because typically the buckle will be larger than 16. But if it's just a butterfly that goes down to 16, that is just gonna be a bit petite for my wrist. So I'm actually really happy with this 40mm, and I'm really happy with this being in a 42, although they have recently released some smaller variations at 38. They don't have the GMT functionality, but who knows, it could come eventually. But you can see these both were really fantastic, so I'm digging them. So I mean, although these aren't the full reviews here, we probably should get some Lume shots of light transition and closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. All right, a little unfair because of course the Seiko 5 is using Seiko's Lume. It is, you know, based on a dive watch platform, so it's going to have some really beautifully applied lume, whereas the you know, the Tissot not so much. And that's fine. I mean, it's, again, if it was just the Tissot you were seeing, it'd probably be rendering a little bit brighter, but now the camera's trying to balance everything out. And with how bright that Seiko Lume is, it's just unfair. So don't get too mad at me, Tissot fans. Believe me, I love the Tissot. I wear it much more than the Seiko 5. It's a more expensive watch. It feels more expensive. Both watches feel more expensive than they actually are. I'd say, you know, the Seiko feels like it could be a good $800 watch, you know, depending on what strap you put it on and everything, of course. But this Tissot does feel quite luxurious. Not to Holy Trinity, you know, levels of, you know, multiple figures and whatnot. But I will say, you know, this definitely has some aspects to it that make it feel like closer to like $1,000 watch versus a $650 watch in terms of kind of how it weighs in. It is a very simple layout, but one thing I always, of course, like to do, I forgot to mention, is work in some low light transition, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to find yourself coming in and out of buildings, walking underneath overhangs, or just hanging out underneath the shade of a tree. So it's nice to see what these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting, to maybe even include some harsh lighting, which might, you know, expose any type of production defects. But all you're going to see here is just maybe a couple of light wear marks, because I do wear these lightly. But you can see there that just the way the light plays with these, you're getting very dynamic options. The Seiko dial, very vibrant. That bezel is very tricked out, where the bicolor is only noticeable at certain lighting angles, but when it pops, it really does. And then of course you're getting that beautiful waffle dial pattern on the Tissot, while also getting a sunray pattern inside of it as well. Then of course all of the light play with the flat brushed bracelets. So very, very nice. Both of these are fantastic watches, and I would say, hey, you know, this, and I would say maybe a Hamilton khaki would be the other one, right, in terms of having like a field watch. These would probably, that would be like a really good solid 3-watch collection. And then maybe a G-Shock just for good measure if you want a beater, right? Those could be really great. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below, your experiences with either of these watches, as well as maybe just trying to fill that hole within the genre. You as a collector, then someone asks you, hey, what watch do you recommend to them as they're figuring things out? I do find myself gravitating a lot towards Tissot PRX, whether it be the Powermatic 80 or the Quartz. And then, you know, that also depends on the size you want to do too. You have some other options there. Or Seiko 5, and maybe it's Seiko 5 GMT if you want something that is going to feel a little bit more aspirational. You get the idea of travel, other time zones, you're using it in the office. It's just kind of something fun to engage with. Sure, you could get the diver style model, which will still be fun, and maybe you could dive time with it. You'll interact with it that way. But yeah, there's definitely fun to be had kind of within this space. They even have, of course, the smaller bezel-less Seiko 5 options, like the Dress KX, as you say. I have a couple of those, and they're outstanding, and I recommend those a lot too. Seiko 5 in general for me is one that, like, it's very easily for me to recommend them because they're not priced so high that you have to have special tastes to appreciate them. And then of course this Tissot, I mean, you're gonna put it on, it's gonna feel like $1 million. Not actually $1 million, but it's gonna feel really nice, and you're gonna feel like you're getting your money's worth. And it's a fun watch with a lot of street cred at the moment, and that's what, you know, the whole kind of idea of a real watch is that people are going to recognize it. Although, yes, you buy it and wear it for yourself. The interaction with other collectors is something that we all kind of yearn for and can appreciate, regardless of the hobby. It's always nice to find other like-minded folk and have something to talk about. So not just a timepiece, but a conversation piece, thanks to the folks, the writers over at Mad Men. So with that said, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you like the video, please would like. And if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.